Okay, it looks like we're live. Great. Well, hello, welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, everyone, where each time we meet, we run down the IT news of the week with a variable degree of snarkiness. I'm your host this week, Ken Nalbone. Joining me is my co-host, Sir Storage himself, Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm afraid that my presence is going to vary the snarkiness quite substantially. We miss you, Rich, but I'll try to fill in.
We'll do our best. And we'll start off in a snarky fashion with our favorite little segment where we quickly cover a few stories shortly called News or Not. So let's jump right into it. First off, Apple has announced on yesterday, that they are joining the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and they're joining members such as Box, GitHub, Spotify, and Walmart. The CNCF members are usually heavy users of open source technologies, which is not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when one thinks of Apple. To be fair to Apple, they've open sourced such things as the XNU kernel, I'm not sure if that's pronounced GNU or whatever, and their Swift programming language. So even if they're not, heavily used cloud computing technologies, they are open source. So Stephen, Apple joining the CNCF, news or not?
I'm kind of excited about it. I mean, I think it's pretty neat if they're going to be part of it, but frankly, I don't think Apple is really news to anybody in the Gestalt IT audience, because who really cares?
Fair enough. Okay, well, let's talk about another CNCF member, Google. This is not CNCF news, though. It's related to their Android operating system. Google confirmed recently that an advanced backdoor had been embedded in the firmware of several Android devices back in 2017. The main purpose of the backdoor was to install apps that would send spam or display ads, things like that. The Trojan in question was found on several mobile devices from manufacturers that I've never heard of, Ligu and Nomu. So, Stephen, hackers embedding Trojans in the supply chain of some Android devices. News or not?
I think this is news. Even though it's obviously, things that you haven't heard of. I mean, this is basically the continuation of a current story. I mean, everybody's trying to hack into Android. Everybody's putting backdoors everywhere, and frankly, it seems like the vendors are powerless to stop it. What do you think?
I agree, especially since you think about other supply chain hack stories recently, and when everyone comes up that's hardware related, people say that makes no sense, like the Supermicro one in particular. There's no way they do that. They could just hack firmwares instead. Here's a perfect case in point of hackers getting into supply chain through firmware or software, getting a much easier way to get access to the hardware itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's hop on to the Cisco hype train. This week is Cisco Live US. We are there, or I should say, Tom is there manning.
We're not there.
Station, but we're there in spirit with Tom. But there were a few interesting announcements from Cisco Live this week, and we'll start off with one from Meraki. Meraki announced a new line of security cameras at Cisco Live. These cameras will be cloud managed and will spot the usual Meraki goodness of easy deployment, configuration, and management. Additionally, the cameras will be bandwidth conscious and contain embedded AI to work with Meraki's new MV Sense platform. Some of the use cases they cited included watching the queues at grocery stores to see if they need more people manning the registers, or playing some media at a display based on the number of people nearby. So AI-enabled cameras from Cisco Meraki. Stephen, news or not?
This is, I think, news. Let me go back to the WWDC last week. Apple introduced secure HomeKit cameras, I think is what they called it. But anyway, that was uncovered news, because essentially what Apple was doing was responding to the fact that basically IP cameras really, really stink, and they send all their crap up to the cloud, and that's where the processing happens. But God only knows what happens to the video up there. And it's just a really bad scene. So Apple is mist computing with certain cameras, using things like the HomePod or an Apple TV to do local processing. Meraki is one-upping that by doing local processing on the camera itself and using end-to-end encryption to control the video. I think this is really, really a big advance. And in fact, I would say this is maybe the biggest news out of Cisco Live in terms of overall impact for normal people.
Okay, so on that note, let's talk about another story from Cisco Live this week, also somewhat AI related. Cisco announcing cognitive collaboration. You may remember that a few months ago, Cisco announced enhancements to WebEx through the use of AI. At Cisco Live this week, the company doubled down on the use of AI and what they are calling cognitive collaboration. The Cisco vision of the platform is that it will crawl the web and assemble information and context to build a full profile of people you're interacting with. And additionally, you'll get things like facial recognition on WebEx calls to identify them in real time. Cisco is claiming that cognitive collaboration will add intelligence and context to daily interactions and highlighted ways in which they are already doing so, as well as their vision for the future. Not so much a product release, more of a just, this is what we're doing and where we see it going. So, Stephen, cognitive collaboration, news or no?
Well, it was pretty cool, but it was pretty also the whole time. And I was watching it. Frankly, I mean, my internal monologue said, "Oh my God, this is the most Silicon Valley thing ever," because it was all about like, they literally used the success of Stanford University graduates as their example. And then they were literally showing like, this is the, salesperson or the contact at this company or that company. I mean, it was so I'm going to say no.
Yeah, and I don't know how you were watching the keynote. They had a live stream directly on their website, but they also had it up on YouTube where they actually had chat enabled, and much of the chatter during the collaborative, I forget the name already, cognitive collaboration announcement was go back to the cameras. Those were more interesting. So I agree. Not as newsworthy as the cameras. All right. Well, that does it for news and now. Let's jump into our main stories now, starting with some acquisitions. Salesforce has announced this week that they intend to acquire the data visualization giant Tableau. In the announcement, Salesforce noted that both companies' boards have approved the deal. And because Tableau is a public traded company, the acquisition will involve trades of Salesforce stock. And analysts have valued it at approximately $15.7 billion. So with Google having announced the acquisition of Tableau competitor Looker last week, do you see this as a reactionary move, or has Salesforce more likely been interested in moving beyond just being a CRM platform and into analytics for a while, Stephen?
The latter. I definitely think that this is part of Salesforce's global universal business domination strategy. I mean, to me, Salesforce looks to me like Amazon, except for business and, B2B. And I think Salesforce is like Amazon, quietly expanded into literally everything. I think Salesforce is quietly expanding into literally everything as well.
I agree. And I mean, you just look at the fact that over however many years of existence, Salesforce has become the giant with just enormous amounts of data that it makes no sense to just leave it there locked away and you just kind of access it by one client at a time or whatever. It's like, what can I get out of looking at my entire portfolio across my entire business? And this is a way that they can do that. Basically, going beyond traditional, business processes to enable something new with analytics and AI. And of course, Tableau is a part of that.
Yep.
Okay. So another acquisition that maybe, but is not yet, could potentially be the website Have I Been Pwned? Troy Hunt, the owner of the popular breach notification website, has revealed that he is looking for a buyer to help manage the service in the face of increased traffic and visibility of the site since earlier this year. In a blog post discussing the future of the site, Hunt said, and I quote, "There's a whole heap of organizations out there that don't know that they've been breached simply because I haven't had the bandwidth to deal with it." That's kind of scary, end quote. Hunt notes that he is looking specifically for a buyer and not for VC funding so that he can spread out the workload amongst several people rather than manage the project completely on his own. So, Stephen, do you think Troy Hunt will be able to find a buyer and ensure the future of his service, Have I Been Pwned, or could the burden of managing it ultimately lead to its demise?
Well, I think this is probably good news. Let me start by saying that I actually know Troy from the Microsoft MVP Summit before he launched Have I Been Pwned. I met him on the bus, and I remember talking to him about it, and he was telling me about what he was going to do, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a good idea. He is a decent human being and a mensch, and I really respect him for basically being so honest about the whole situation, basically coming out and saying, look, I need help. I don't want to run a business. I just want to do the engineering on this thing, but it's really awesome. And I think he will have no trouble finding a buyer. In fact, I think the challenge for him is to find the right buyer. Luckily, it looks like he's secured some assistance in that. He's got KPMG helping him weigh different offers. He's got a whole community of people that are, I'm sure, going to provide honest feedback about potential buyers. And I think that this is just a tremendous way forward for him and for all of us. I think that this is a valuable service, and it will continue, and it will be a success in the hands of a new buyer. As to who that buyer is, there are probably 40 companies that would potentially buy it. There's probably 10 companies that will pay big money for it, and I'm sure it'll go to somebody, and Troy will continue working on it.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, this is basically since he had a notification of what it was at 730 million passwords leaked earlier this year. That's when kind of the reputation of the site skyrocketed. It was January of this year. And I think it has become indispensable basically for folks who want to keep their ear to the ground when it comes to these kinds of breaches. It fills a void in the space, and there's nothing else like it. And somebody's going to want to pick it up or emulate it. It's probably easier to just buy it than recreate your own service. It makes me wonder though, who's going to buy it, and are they going to try to monetize it and kind of close it off? It's very public right now. Anybody can just go on there and find out. And what would that mean for the future of the platform if one of these companies you're talking about buys it, but we're selling the premium service and you can find out about the breaches before everybody else, and we reveal it next week, and everybody else, well, you're out of luck until we disclose this, that kind of thing.
I hope that that's not the way it goes, and I don't think it will. I mean, I honestly, I think the leading contenders, I'd say Cloudflare has to be one of the leading contenders, because Cloudflare already handles, I believe, 99% of Have I Been Pwned traffic. He's been pretty proud of how much he's been able to offload. And I think that a company like that would do us all proud.
Yeah, I hope so too. Not to sound cynical. I think I always come across that way on the show, but I got to play devil's advocate, right?
So cynical.
Yeah, I am. Sorry.
Straighten up.
All right, I'll straighten up now, and I'll talk about an acquisition that has me excited. Intel has made big waves this week when they announced that they are going to acquire Barefoot Networks. We know Barefoot. They make Ethernet switch silicon, and they're basically known for their P4 programmable Tofino Ethernet switch ASICs. That's a mouthful for me. I'm not a networking guy, but I've heard of this stuff, and it sounds really cool. The programmable nature of Barefoot silicon makes it a very popular choice among large service providers for the purpose of quote-unquote cloud networking. And so as we're seeing infrastructure become a more programmable resource, is this a move that Intel needed to make? And could they have done it in-house, programming or creating this kind of product line, or did it make more sense for them to just expand their portfolio via this acquisition?
Well, this is classic Intel, isn't it? I mean, go out there and buy something big. And, I got to say, again, we became familiar with Barefoot as part of Tech Field Day. By the way, if you're curious about it, what exactly Barefoot is all about, just go to Tech Field Day, type Barefoot in the search box, and you'll see some videos, or just, find it on YouTube. There's some great presentations that go over the capabilities of the product. But essentially what you're looking at here is, it's kind of like the CPU, except for big iron networking switches that are increasingly, popular. And, this was an excellent team. I mean, Barefoot was really an A player kind of company, doing really A player kind of work in that space. And, Intel, I think, sees this as an area of, strategic expansion and strategic importance for them. So this, I think, was just a home run for Intel, certainly a home run for the Barefoot folks. And, I think everybody should be applauding.
Did Intel have anything even close to this kind of capability in their portfolio before acquiring Barefoot? I didn't think so. And I look at it, and, from what I can tell, it looks like these their chips are somewhere in between a CPU and an ASIC, both in terms of performance and in programmability. So it's kind of that sweet spot of, we want to be able to do some interesting things, but we don't want just some, open source, cloud-based Linux operating system on our switches that, it can do cool stuff, but might slow it down. We want something that's a little bit more specific, and that's where Barefoot fills in. Yeah.
Well, Intel's been cleverly, they've been doing the Intel thing, which is basically, here's a Xeon, let's make lots and lots of high-speed paths in and out of it. for, IO and use that as the basis for these kind of products. So when I say no, Intel didn't have anything like this, they didn't have anything, like hardware wise, but they had a strategy of doing this sort of thing. And with the same kind of CPUs that from servers. But this is just a great step forward for them. And, if you look at some of the other things that Intel is doing, with FPGAs and, with the new direction for their GPU and, ML, acceleration and so on. I mean, this absolutely fits right in with that. Again, not to do too much of a thing, but we went to an Intel launch recently for the second generation Xeon Scalable processors as Tech Field Day, and there's a bunch of videos up there, including one from Intel's connectivity team, where Brian Johnson talks about specifically what Intel is doing in terms of Ethernet connectivity and programmability and analysis and all that kind of stuff. So before this acquisition happened, you can see kind of where Intel was, and I think not to spill too many beans, but watch this space and you may learn a little bit more about where Intel is going with this product.
Maybe they'll get a few hints from their manufacturing process too. From what I understand, Barefoot has 7 nanometer production, whereas Intel is still stuck on 14 nanometers for a lot of their products. So maybe they could use some of their engineers for their fab process too.
It's just Texas, Taiwan Semiconductor, yeah.
All right. That does it for the acquisition stories. Let's hop on to the continuing saga of Huawei now.
Let me get out my violin here.
I know, right? So Western Digital is the latest in a series of companies announcing that they are severing ties with Huawei following the company's blacklisting by the U.S. Department of Commerce back in May. So this comes on the heels of an announced partnership between the two companies just this past April, in which Western Digital would supply both hard drives and flash storage to the Chinese company. So, Stephen, how badly does this announcement affect Huawei compared to recent announcements from the likes of Google and ARM? And does the company have any hope of becoming whitelisted before the U.S. government begins enforcement of the ban, which will happen in about 90 days, I believe?
First, my opinion is that absolutely nothing is going to come of any of this because it's just political posturing, in my opinion. That being said, I think that this actually could be really damaging in the short term for Huawei and damaging in the long term for Western Digital, because Western Digital is in a pitched battle with others in this space. And frankly, there's a lot of Chinese companies that are fighting and elbowing their way in. And if Western Digital was actually locked out of Huawei long term, this could seriously impact their prospects, long term, because Huawei might turn to one of those Chinese competitors. And that wouldn't be good for them. Well, wouldn't be good for Western Digital, I mean.
So if you think that this, the entire Huawei saga is nothing but posturing, who do you think is going to blink first when it comes to this ongoing battle between the U.S. and Huawei and all the companies affected in between?
Trump.
You think so? Okay.
He blinks. I mean, the dude's a blinker. He's the world's worst negotiator. And I think that what's going to happen is somebody's going to tell him, oh, we won, and he's going to say, okay, we won, and that'll be the end of it. Regardless of what happens with this thing. I mean, that being said, I think that one of the things that might come out of this, and it's the same thing that's come out of, for example, these alleged Mexican tariffs that didn't happen and the attacks on Europe with tariffs in China. I think what's going to happen is it's going to shake the confidence of the global supply chain in American companies. And, Huawei, no matter what happens with this, I think Huawei and others going forward are going to look at Western Digital with a bit of a skeptical eye about whether, they can maintain, long-term predictable trading relations. Not to get too political on you, but I feel like, from a Wall Street point of view, any threat of tariffs is a bad one, even if they don't happen, because it basically poisons the well for the next sale.
Okay, interesting perspective. And speaking of Western Digital, they're a storage company. Let's talk about another storage company, finally. One of the first cloud storage providers aimed at end users announced a platform pivot yesterday. Dropbox has launched a new version that will focus on app integration with the likes of Slack, Zoom, G Suite, and others in an effort to enhance productivity by providing a unified workspace, as they call it. The company claims that the current way we work is broken and that their intent is to enhance coordination of teams and tools. The new app is currently in early access, and users can opt in to the new desktop app through the Dropbox website. So is the new app launch, Stephen, the next step in Dropbox's evolution, or is it a desperation play to maintain relevance because cloud storage is neither unique nor differentiated anymore?
Well, I think that it's more of the latter. That being said, I'm a big fan of Dropbox as a company, and we use it internally ourselves. But I'm not sure I would call it strategic, and perhaps that's their problem. This maybe makes it a little bit more strategic, but frankly, I don't think any of these companies have managed to make themselves a strategic part of the business. Whether you're looking at Dropbox or Box or a lot of the Microsoft, Cisco. I mean, this goes back kind of the Cisco WebEx discussion as well. A lot of these tools just are, I don't want to say interchangeable because there's a good recurring revenue stream and lock-in and so on, but maybe forgettable. And I think that Dropbox really needs to do this sort of thing in order to move forward.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's maybe necessarily a game changer. I will say that, we use Dropbox internally, as you mentioned, it's fine. At previous jobs, I've used the entire Microsoft Office 365 suite of products, which includes OneDrive, of course, and that is deeply integrated with all their other stuff, like, all the Office productivity, Excel and Word, and their Teams platform, which is a competitor to Slack, and even into OneNote, which is the note-taking app. And it's very easy to get embedded with all of those because of the integration. I think maybe Dropbox is trying to do something like this, except they're just relying on a bunch of popular third-party tools and building integrations with them. Time will tell if it works out for them. I agree. It's something that they kind of need to do. It's not a game changer, but it is kind of another checkbox for folks who are trying to figure out which platform they want to use for their business, right? I don't know that a lot of people are making that decision these days. They probably picked one and are working with it. So unless they're really frustrated with their current provider, or they're starting something new and just want to have a fresh start, I don't know that's really going to move the needle for most folks.
Yeah, I don't know that it will. I mean, that being said, I think that everybody welcomes third-party integrations with any tool that they're using. We use Slack, and I would love to have some kind of advanced Slack Dropbox integration. I suppose I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but we'll see. But like you said, I mean, if you're using Microsoft, maybe you're going to use Microsoft, OneDrive. If you're using Google, maybe you use Google Drive. They need something, and hopefully this helps push them forward.
Hopefully, yeah. So, Stephen, that should just about do it for the Gestalt IT rundown today. So remember, folks, if you missed any of this episode, full episodes are available on the Gestalt IT Facebook page and YouTube. Remember to catch us live on Facebook every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. For more great IT content, be sure to check out gestaltit.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.